Was Keffe D actually confessing to his role in Tupac Shakur's death, or did years of talking finally catch up with him? Let's get into the story here on Black Feather Crime. Hello all, Stacy the Black Feather Intuitive. Welcome to Black Feather Crime. Around here, we're all about curiosity, clarity, and courage, understanding ourselves, each other, and the beautifully messy mystery of being human. Imagine spending decades publicly telling one of the most infamous murder stories in music history, only to eventually find yourself sitting at the defense table because prosecutors believe the story you told was a confession. That is where Tupac Shakur's case stands today. 30 years after Tupac was shot on a Las Vegas street, a jury is finally hearing evidence. But strangely enough, one of the biggest questions they must answer isn't whether Duane Davis talked about the murder. He absolutely did. The question is whether he was telling the truth when he did. And that makes this case about something much bigger than one night in Las Vegas. It becomes a story about identity, loyalty, reputation, and what happens when the stories we tell about ourselves eventually demand to be proven. If you like this type of content and our true crime meets intuitive insight today, please like, subscribe, and comment with suggestions for cases you're exploring too. Would love to be able to tune in for you in this way. So, on the night of September 7th of 1996, Tupac Shakur attended the Mike Tyson-Bryce Seldon boxing match at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas with Death Row Records co-founder Marion Suge Knight and members of their entourage. After the fight, surveillance video captured Tupac and others attacking Orlando Baby Lane Anderson inside the MGM Grand. Anderson was the nephew of Duane Keffe D. Davis and affiliated with the Southside Compton Crips. Prosecutors now argue that attack set in motion the events that followed. Several hours later, Tupac was riding in the passenger seat of a BMW driven by Suge Knight near the Las Vegas Strip. A white Cadillac pulled alongside them, gunfire erupted, and Tupac was struck 4 times. Knight was wounded but survived. Tupac died 6 days later on September 13th of 96. For 3 decades, no one was charged. Orlando Anderson was repeatedly discussed as a possible suspect, but denied involvement before his own death in 1998. Then Duane Davis began talking. In a 2008 law enforcement interview and eventually in media interviews in his 2019 memoir, Davis described being inside the Cadillac that pulled alongside Tupac. He said 4 men were in the vehicle: Duane Davis, Orlando Anderson, DeAndre Big Dre Smith, and Terrence T. Brown Brown. Davis has described obtaining or possessing the firearm and passing it toward the back seat. He ultimately identified his nephew, Orlando Anderson, as the shooter. Years of those statements eventually became central to the renewed Las Vegas investigation. And in September of 23, Davis was arrested and charged with murder. He, of course, pleaded not guilty. And in August of 2026, almost 30 years after Tupac died, the first murder trial connected to his death has finally begun. Let's discuss the timeline, because there's a lot that has gone into this particular crime. It starts on September 7th of 1996 in the evening. Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight attended the Mike Tyson fight at the MGM Grand. Afterward, Tupac and members of the Death Row entourage encounter Orlando Anderson. Surveillance video captures Anderson being attacked. Later that night, Tupac leaves the MGM Grand with Suge Knight. They travel toward a nightclub with an entourage of vehicles. At a traffic light near Flamingo Road and Covell Lane, a white Cadillac pulls alongside Knight's BMW. Multiple shots are fired, and Tupac is critically wounded. Suge Knight survives. On September 13th of 96, Tupac dies at age 25. His death is ruled a homicide. Now in 1998, Orlando Anderson dies in an unrelated shooting. No one has been charged in Tupac's murder at this time. Fast forward to 2008. Duane Davis participates in a confidential law enforcement interview connected to broader investigations involving the Tupac and Notorious B.I.G. cases. During that interview, Davis gives a detailed account of the shooting. And fast forward now to 2018 and into 2019. Davis begins publicly discussing the murder in interviews and media appearances. His memoir, Compton Street Legend, is published in 2019. His descriptions of the murder receive renewed attention. We always tell on ourselves eventually, right? July of 2023, Las Vegas police execute a search warrant at a home connected to Davis's wife as the murder investigation intensifies. September 29th of 23, Duane Davis is finally arrested. He is later indicted on a murder charge. From the years 23 to 26, extensive pretrial litigation follows. The defense attempts to exclude portions of Davis's previous statements. But in June and July of 2026, the judge rules that both Davis's memoir and his earlier police interview may be presented to jurors. On August 10th of 26, jury selection begins in Las Vegas. On August 17th, opening statements begin. That's just a few days ago from the time that we're recording this. Prosecutors describe the shooting as retaliation for the MGM Grand attack on Orlando Anderson. The defense counters with an unusual strategy. Davis was lying when he claimed involvement. August 18th through to the 21st, jurors hear crime scene testimony, medical evidence regarding Tupac's death, testimony about the gang dynamics surrounding death row, reluctant testimony from individuals connected to that world, and the crucial 2008 recording in which Davis describes what happened inside the Cadillac. And the trial remains underway as we speak. So let's talk about the key people here in the case, and then we'll get to the reading. The first person and the most important person here is Tupac Shakur, 25 years old when he died. He was a rapper, actor, poet, and one of the most influential artists in modern music, still to this day. Tupac's cultural image often becomes larger than the human being that he was. He was a young man whose life ended violently just as his creative influence was exploding. Then we have Duane Keffe D. Davis, 63 years old, former Southside Compton Crips figure, the only person ever criminally charged in Tupac's murder. Prosecutors allege he helped orchestrate the retaliation, obtained the firearm, and participated in the pursuit. He is not currently accused of personally firing the fatal shots, and he has pleaded not guilty. Then we have Orlando Baby Lane Anderson. This is Davis's nephew. He was attacked by Tupac and others inside the MGM Grand shortly before the shooting. Davis later identified Anderson as the shooter. Anderson denied involvement while alive and was never charged, and he died in 1998. Then we have DeAndre Big Dre Smith, another alleged occupant of the Cadillac, who is also now deceased. And Terrence T. Brown, the alleged driver and occupant of the Cadillac, also deceased. Davis is now the only surviving person prosecutors say occupied the vehicle. Then we have Marion Suge Knight, founder of Death Row Records. He was driving the BMW when Tupac was shot. Knight survived. His knowledge of that night has generated enormous public interest for decades. And finally, Mob James McDonald, former Death Row associate. His reluctant 2026 testimony illustrates one of the central obstacles investigators have faced for decades around this case. People who may know something but do not want to participate in the criminal justice system. So let's dive into the questions and the reading here. The first question we're going to explore is, was Keffe D telling the truth? And this is kind of bizarre, right? To think that a defendant would use the defense that he's been lying this whole time, making up this story, for fame or whatever the case may be, and that this is what he's taking to trial. That my mind is blown with that. So Duane Davis repeatedly placed himself inside the Cadillac in his 2008 police interview, later media appearances, and his memoir. His defense now argues those accounts were exaggerated or fabricated for attention and money. So the question here is, when Duane Davis described his role in Tupac's murder, how much of what he said was truth? And what was he trying to gain, protect, or control by telling the story the way he did? So from a Spidey sense perspective, before tapping into the cards, I'm getting that he absolutely knew what was going on. And the reason why he did not share his story or his accounting of the story until a few years later when he started talking about it, I feel is because he was feeling a little bit safe. The fact that, no charges had been filed, there was all of this speculation. He assumed that the police were never going to be able to convict anyone. And I want to say he got a little big for his britches. He decided at that time that he could earn some street cred, that he might as well take advantage of this opportunity. And I want to say you don't need to be psychic to know that there is a lot of component of gang activity and being involved in different gang activity by being required to prove yourself, being required to perform certain acts and bolster yourself up and create an image of yourself that perhaps is much bigger than what the truth is, in order to get street cred, right? So I feel like Keffe D was really kind of a bit egotistical about this, trying to take advantage of that situation, trying to puff himself up. And I will say to you, I feel like what he was trying to protect or control by telling the story was he assumed that if he's going off and saying these things, that nobody's actually going to believe. The people that he wants to believe his story are going to believe his story and are going to be a little afraid of him, right? And the people outside of that situation are going to say nobody in their right mind would, talk such a big game and just put their confession all out in the world. But I feel like this was actually really, in a lot of ways, kind of his downfall. Yes, he did gain a little more, I want to say, reputation that he was looking for, but ultimately now he's facing the music. The second question we're going to explore today is what actually triggered the shooting. This has been a question for so long. Prosecutors say the attack was immediate retaliation for Tupac and his entourage beating Orlando Anderson at the MGM Grand. Decades of public theories have proposed much larger motives. Was Tupac's murder fundamentally an act of retaliation for the MGM Grand fight, or was there a deeper motive or dynamic already in motion that night? I feel like the truth is somewhere in between. I'm going to pull a card here just to sort of see what we get. But I feel like there was something, like there was already heat between these two factions, these individuals and these groups. I definitely feel that there was already that stuff going on, but I don't know that it was intentional, that they were going out to cause trouble that night, to create something that night. But I feel that this was kind of a situation of opportunity. Oh, you started the fight. We already were looking for an excuse to knock you down and knock you out. This is the time. This is why we're doing what we're doing. So we pulled the Fool card, and I do feel very much that it's what I've been describing here. There was something brewing under the surface, but there was no specific plan to carry anything out that night. But there was an attack of opportunity. And that's what this feels like. With the Fool card, the Fool is a bit naive. The Fool comes to a precipice and says, all right, I'm going to, take this blind leap of faith. And I'm not really prepared for what is going to happen. I haven't thought this plan out. There is no plan. There's more of a, I'm going to jump off this cliff because this is what is being presented to me right now, and let's just do it and, see where the chips may fall. So I want to say the truth is somewhere in between. It was an act of retaliation, but there also was something brewing that if it didn't happen this night, it would have happened another night. There would have been another attempt. What happened inside the Cadillac? Davis says 4 men were inside the white Cadillac and identified Orlando Anderson as the shooter. Of all the alleged occupants except Davis are now all of the alleged occupants except Davis are now dead, and Anderson was never charged. So the question here is, what actually happened inside that Cadillac in the moments before the shots were fired, and what has been most misunderstood about who made the decision to attack Tupac? So just tuning in from a spidey sense perspective, I'm seeing the car. I'm seeing a lot of bravado. How could that? We got to get that MFer. Who does that MFer think he is? We got to knock him down. Of course, I'm paraphrasing here. And I see I just keep seeing the person that was in the passenger seat, the front passenger seat, kept turning back and looking at the person. Sorry, I just hit my mic. Turning at the person, looking back at the person on the left back seat, the left-hand side of the back seat. And I'm hearing the phrase egging him on, saying, you've got to vindicate yourself here. You've got to get back at him. And I see the gun. So one of them, I feel like there was more. I don't know if this is true or not, but I feel like there was more than one gun in the car, in the vehicle. But I'm seeing one gun being pulled out of the, sort of the belt area of the person in the front of the vehicle, the right passenger seat. And I see him kind of waving the gun around and being like, listen, you can take care of this shit right now. And he's like instructing the driver, we're going to go here, we're going to go there, let's go seek them out. And the person in the back I feel there's some conflict there. I feel a lot of fear on the inside, but I also feel like a lot of bravado on the outside. And now he's in a situation where he has to save face, and he's got someone who's pressuring him to do this. And I don't know if this person had ever been in this situation before, had taken a life before, but it almost feels like, this is going to sound kind of gross, guys, but this is what's coming through. It's like the concept of like popping the cherry, right? In those gang-related violent situations, often that's how you get into the gang, is you prove yourself by taking a life, or you prove yourself by beating somebody up, to the point of, being in the hospital, or, something along those lines. It's always something obvious that everyone knows has occurred. And that's how you kind of pop your cherry. That's kind of how you get your wings, so to speak. And so I feel sheer terror in the person sitting in the back seat, but I also feel this level of bravado and him realizing, I guess this is it. Like, I guess now is the time. I don't want to have to do this, but I guess I'm going to have to do this. And so I feel a lot of this just pressure in the car, pressure to do this, pressure to do that. And the person sitting in the front seat, in the passenger side, I feel was the one that really kind of orchestrated a lot of this, put the pressure on people, had the gun, directed the driver on where to go. So I feel just a lot of orchestration on the part of the person in the front seat. What has been, sort of most misunderstood about who made the decision to attack him, I don't feel that this was something that they were intending to address in that moment. And I feel like the person in the back seat was hoping that they'd have time to kind of put a plan in place to be more strategic. But now, like, we're in the moment. We're in like Flynn. We have to do this. This is what we're having to do. And so there's a lot of anxiety around, being in the moment and no plans. And I wasn't expecting this, and I'm not prepared for this. And okay, I'm going to do it. Just lots of pressure. Here we have the Knight of Coins. Yes, I feel like the person in the back seat was really hoping to take their time with this, that they could get retaliation in their own way, that they could get retaliation later on down the road, and that they would kind of be able to go out in a fanfare of their own making. So in some ways, I feel like, again, this person was terrified, but also wanted to kind of have a better plan so that they couldn't get caught. That's kind of how I'm feeling about it. The next question, why did justice take 30 years? So law enforcement had heard versions of this gang retaliation theory for decades, yet no one was charged until Davis's increasingly public statements helped revive the case. Why did it take nearly 30 years for this case to reach a courtroom? And what combination of silence, loyalty, fear, or investigative limitation kept the truth from becoming prosecutable sooner? I'm hearing here very clearly that people just did not want to share what they knew about the situation. Also, because it happened so quickly, it was in the moment, it wasn't a thought out crime. It was very spur of the moment and sporadic, that a lot of the accounts of what people knew were secondhand accounts. Were those secondhand accounts true? Yes, because I feel like when they came back and they talked about it again, a lot of bravado, let's make this work for us to, hold up our egos and our reputations. But on the inside, there was a lot of fear. And I feel like the actual shooter did speak to someone who was kind of at his level. I would say sort of in the hierarchy of the gang. This was someone that, he had come up with, and they could be a little more honest with each other, that they could kind of drop some of that bravado just with each other, not with anyone else. And that person did know what actually transpired, did know that there was some pressure, that this was a spur of the moment thing, and that, he was really scared about what was actually going to happen, that wasn't his intention. So I feel like people not being willing to break their silence, code of honor, code of loyalty, or I would say maybe it's not so much loyalty as much as it's fear. Because in those circles as well, your word is your bond, and that's what keeps you alive. So I do feel a lot of that. I also feel like the investigation could only go so far because they were only able to collect so much evidence. And while they did have some evidence, I feel like it was not circumstantial necessarily, but like not enough of it to conclusively prove. They knew that, the gunfire came from that vehicle. It came from the Cadillac. They could prove that, but could they prove who actually did it in the car? And I do feel through, sort of forensic science and, doing the backtracking and working through their process, that they did have a really strong idea of who did it, but I don't feel like they could actually prove it. And the fact that Duane Davis keeps running his mouth, and that he actually wrote a book on it, and that he gave that interview on it, the police just kind of strung him along until they could formulate that, I want to say, slightly more than circumstantial evidence, because that's what he's being prosecuted on, right? That's what the trial is about. It's a little more, I don't know if it's the right term that I'm using, circumstantial evidence. It's not circumstantial, it's evidence that's there, but they're having to connect the dots. They're having to prove to a jury that this was actually confession. It wasn't just a story, it was confession. And they're basically having to prove, did he lie then or is he lying now? And that's, in essence, what is trying to come up here. The final question here, what story has distracted us from the truth? Tupac's death generated decades of theories involving artists, executives, rival record labels, and law enforcement. The current prosecution is presenting a comparatively straightforward retaliation theory. What public narrative or conspiracy has most distracted people from understanding Tupac's murder? And what simpler truth may have been hiding beneath all the mythology? What I keep hearing is law enforcement, in a lot of ways when this happened, kind of chalked it up to gang violence. It's just putting it into one lump sum. It's gang violence. So we know how this goes. Bang, bang, shoot him up. Somebody's dead. We're going to do, the investigation the way that we would do any investigation, but we're not going to go above and beyond until they found out who the murder victim was. And now suddenly it's, oh, we actually have to take this to another level. You know, now we have the added pressure of the press and the public and the media. You know, this became a case that was so much bigger than, I want to say, I don't mean to make light of it, but like your average typical gang violence event that unfortunately occurs on a regular basis. So I feel like the distraction really has been because Tupac was so big, because he represented something big. It's almost like that clouded over a lot of the investigation, that hung over the investigation, put a lot of extra added pressure to it. And I also feel like there are a lot of people who have little bits of information based on what they've heard, and the ones that were, you know, the ones that were there, they're all dead now. That was the biggest hindrance, I feel, in a lot of ways, was people just choosing not to speak about it. Whew. All right, guys. This one was an important one for me to read on, just because it's, you know, connected to my generation. It has always been a curiosity. It has always been something that I feel needs to have some closure to it. And even if that closure comes 30 years later, bring it on. Every episode of Black Feather Crime is created with deep respect for the victims, their loved ones, and everyone still searching for answers. My intention here is never sensationalism. It's understanding, it's truth, and helping wherever I can. If something I've shared today sparks a new perspective or helps move a case forward, then this work has served its purpose. And if anyone in law enforcement feels that something I've shared could be helpful, I would be honored to assist in any way I can. Until we meet again, hug your loved ones, be fully present with what's here now, because now is all we truly have. And remember, curiosity gets us in the door, clarity helps us understand what we've seen, and courage is what we do with what we've learned. Until I see you for another episode of Black Feather Crime, sending lots of love and support. We'll see you on the flip side, and transform well.